Stock futures came in lower this morning as the Dow slid 130 points. The S&P 500 futures dropped 0.51%. Traders are looking ahead to key reports coming in the next week that could offer some insight into the health of the economy. A new consumer price index is coming this Thursday, and that's how the government tracks inflation. New numbers could play a key role in determining just how much the Federal Reserve will increase interest rates come November. Russia is praising OPEC Plus for agreeing to sharp cuts in oil production. The move by the 13-country cartel is expected to impact U.S. gas prices and potentially the midterm elections. It's also further dividing the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. So Javier David is here with me in Studio 57 to talk more about today's Money Watch headlines. He's the managing editor of Business and Markets at Axios. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
So the Consumer Price Index report, basically a snapshot of where inflation is at. We have seen these interest rates continue to tick up with a warning that another hike may be coming. But will this latest report even give us any indication as to whether or not what the Fed is doing is working?
Well, we certainly hope so. But the jobs data that we got last Friday would suggest that we're probably still in territory that's still a little bit too hot for the Fed's comfort. Jobs are still being created at a relatively brisk pace. It slowed down. We created jobs in September that was probably the weakest in about a year. But the bottom line of it is the jobs market's still too hot. At the core of all of this talk about inflation is demand. What keeps demand elevated? People getting paid more money, people being able to leave jobs if they need to find a better paying job. All of this kind of creates this dynamic in which you're still continuing to see inflation really, really hot. So we hope that the numbers that we see this week are going to be a little bit calmer. But we've just had a number of head fakes this year, and there's nothing. Yeah,
it's so true. I'm glad that you sort of explained that how everything is sort of interconnected. We don't want people to lose jobs. Nobody does.
Right.
But what does happen is if people have income, then demand stays high. If demand stays high, then manufacturers are not encouraged to drop the price of their products, which means the prices stay high, which means we have inflation.
Precisely.
That's sort of how it works. So yeah, we talked about the September job numbers. So you don't see the numbers as cooling off in any way, even though it was sort of came in a little lower than most experts thought.
Right. So what's happening with the jobs market is it's been improbably strong. It seems like we talk about this every day and we can't stop talking about it enough because the bottom line is there are just still too many jobs being created. There was this dynamic where we had in the earlier in the year where employers had a bunch of jobs that were open. There are still more than 10 million, 11 million jobs in the order still open. What's happening now is I think that most employers are just not filling those jobs. Rather than laying people off, they're just allowing some of those positions that were already open and were already unfilled to just quietly sort of fade away. And in turn, you're not seeing mass layoffs. We're seeing certain tech segments of the economy, particularly the tech sector, is pretty weak. They've had a number of announcements that there are people getting pink slipped. But, truthfully, we're not seeing anything in the order that we would associate that would be much more congruous with a slowdown.
Okay, so let's talk about OPEC Plus's decision to roll back the number by 200 million barrels a day, which, as I understand it, is not the exact number because some OPEC members were already coming in under. But still, it's concerning. There's a possibility that we could see more oil being released from the Strategic Oil Reserve, but a lot has already been released. The Biden administration floated the idea of Venezuela opening up to Venezuela.
Perhaps.
My question is, does any of this really make a difference? I mean, will that help us here in the U.S.? And even if we sort of have miraculously the ability to flood the market with oil, the price of a barrel of oil basically stays the same regardless, right?
Right. So what you're seeing now is as oil has sort of come up, gas prices are starting to climb again. And this is kind of why, already. And, the sad part of this is the United States is the world's largest producer of oil and gas. But because of these quirks in the market, it's not helpful to what we need here in the United States. So we're still very much kind of dependent on OPEC countries and their output. We kind of have to do this kabuki dance with Saudi Arabia, the Venezuelans, et cetera. But still here, our domestic production is still not what it needs to be. There's a lot of complaints from oil producers that they're not getting the support that they need from the Biden administration in order to gin up more supply. And there are real reasons, primarily environmental reasons, that the Biden administration has imposed so that it's a constraint on supply. That's basically the best way to think about it.
So the last time we saw gas prices tick up, we kept on warning everyone that means everything's going to be affected. Because it's going to be more expensive to get you whatever products you want to your store shelves. But the price of things have not gone down yet.
They haven't.
So are we going to look at even worse inflation in the future?
Well, if the Fed has its way, they're going to meet again next month.
Yeah.
And they'll likely give us another sort of supersized rate hike. We're hoping that will be sort of enough for them to sort of step back and say, okay, let's see where things stand. That'll be the last meeting of the year. But in the grand scheme of things, there's no real relief in sight. And as long as I mentioned at the top of the conversation, jobs stay high and people make money, that question of demand is still kind of what's keeping prices on the boil.
So just brace yourself.
Brace yourselves.
Javier, thank you very much.
Sure.